as a Mormon in the temple, I've been told, he would have sworn an oath to say that he would not pass on what happens in the temple, lest he slit his throat. Is that true?
That's not true. That's not true. We do not have penalties in the temple.
You used to.
We used to.
Therefore, he swore an oath saying, I will not tell anyone about the secrets here, lest I slit my throat.
Hey there YouTube, I'm Forrest, Latter-day Skeptic. It's been a few weeks since I last posted, and I hope everyone had a great holiday season. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the top 3 reasons that caused me to leave the Mormon Church. If you've personally transitioned out of your faith, I'd love to hear about it in the comment section below. Also, please like and subscribe. Every subscriber helps. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first major crack in my shelf was the discovery about the false translation of the Book of Abraham. For this video, I'm not going to talk about the whole CES letter, and I'm going to use the Book of Abraham as a stand-in for most of the arguments presented in the CES letter. But at some point, I do plan on doing a tier list of all the arguments found in it. But for 19-year-old Mormon me, the controversy behind the Book of Abraham was the most clear and convincing case that Joseph Smith was a fraud. For those of you that don't know the controversy behind the Book of Abraham, it's a foundational text for the Mormon Church. It presents many of the unique doctrines to the Mormon Church, such as the pre-existence, preordination, and a plurality of gods. The origin story behind the Book of Abraham is that Joseph Smith bought these Egyptian scrolls from a traveling salesman and then translated them into the book that we know of as the Book of Abraham.
And Joseph translated them by the gift and power of God. The translation revealed that the Book of Abraham contains several of the details discussed in the biblical account of Abraham found in Genesis, such as Abraham's covenant with the Lord and his journey into Egypt. However, the Book of Abraham also reveals new truths not found in the Genesis account, such as a vision that Abraham had about our premortal existence when we lived with God as spirits, as well as additional information about the creation of the earth.
The problem is, as the Rosetta Stone was better understood, Egyptian experts were able to translate the papyri, and none of the experts' translations matched what Joseph Smith claimed to have translated.
10 fragments of the scrolls were found in the archives of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Egyptologists have translated these papyrus fragments and determined that they don't directly relate to the Book of Abraham. Instead, they contain ancient Egyptian funerary texts.
Now, there are people that have tried to get around this, but the evidence is so clear that even the Mormon Church has had to admit that these translations don't match.
When those fragments resurface, one of those fragments has on it the original for facsimile 1. Facsimile 1 is a facsimile of the drawing that is on that papyrus fragment. We call it Papyrus Joseph Smith 1. And that drawing has text adjacent to it. The immediate assumption made by both members of the church and critics of the church was that the source then for the Book of Abraham would have been the text surrounding that drawing. That's a natural assumption, fair enough to make. In Joseph Smith's day, we couldn't translate that text via academic means. Today we can. We translate it, and it turns out to be a common Egyptian funerary document. It's called the Book of Breathings. For the time period, it's somewhat common, and it has nothing to do with Abraham. We have to ask ourselves, what does Joseph Smith mean when he says he's translating? It's also possible that he's looking at this, and it's more like the Joseph Smith translation. He's looking at a text here, and that opens him up to inspiration or revelation to give us something that's not even on that text.
Every time I hear these apologetic arguments, I'm shocked that anyone believes them. Joseph Smith got these scrolls, he claimed to have translated them, and then he got busted when we found out that the translation doesn't match what's actually on the papyri. The idea that these scrolls were just a medium for Joseph Smith to have a revelation is obviously just a post hoc justification, and it creates all sorts of questions. Why did he need the papyri at all? Why couldn't he have just used any old text? In fact, why is a text required to have this revelation in the first place? When I first discovered this at the age of 19, I thought I had found something so damning that no one could deny it. When I shared it with my friends and family, many of them just laughed it off and said, "Oh yeah, that old stuff, yeah, we know about it." And honestly, I was shocked. That was the first time I realized that evidence and reason typically aren't enough to get people to stop believing. But for me, the fraud behind the Book of Abraham was a major problem for my faith. The second major crack in my shelf was when I realized that prophets keep making major mistakes. They keep leading us astray. As I got older, it became clear to me that prophets were just like us. They're not special, and they're able to communicate with God just as much as the rest of us. As I began to look at the track record of the prophets, it was full of things like child brides, racist teachings, and false doctrines. I mean, take the priesthood ban, for instance.
For much of its history, from the mid-1800s until 1978, the church did not ordain men of black African descent to its priesthood or allow black men or women to participate in temple endowment or sealing ordinances. This was known as the priesthood and temple ban. Brigham said, as far as the common comforts of life, salvation, light, truth, enjoyment, and understanding is considered, the black African has precisely the same privilege as the white man. But they cannot hold the priesthood. If there never was a prophet or apostle of Jesus Christ that spoke it before, I tell you, this people that are commonly called Negroes are the children of old Cain. They cannot bear rule in the priesthood.
Or how about the November policy that banned the children of gay parents from being baptized?
We wrestled at length to understand the Lord's will in this matter. And then when the Lord inspired his prophet, President Thomas S. Monson, to declare the mind of the Lord and the will of the Lord, each of us during that sacred moment felt a spiritual confirmation. It was our privilege as apostles to sustain what had been revealed to President Monson. Revelation from the Lord to his servants is a sacred process.
Or what about temple ceremony changes, such as the removal of the blood oath?
Was this motion of slitting your throat. And when you do that, you say, I will suffer my life to be taken. And then you do it, there's another one where you slit your bowels open by doing the same sort of a motion. That was done away with too.
Let's talk about Mitt Romney.
Okay.
The man who may well become the most powerful man on earth.
Mm-hmm.
As a Mormon, in the temple, I've been told, he would have sworn an oath to say that he would not pass on what happens in the temple, lest he slit his throat. Is that true?
That's not true. That's not true. We do not have penalties in the temple.
You used to.
We used to.
Therefore, he swore an oath saying, I will not tell anyone about the secrets here, lest I slit my throat.
Well, the vow that was made was regarding the ordinance of the temple.
It sounds Masonic, sir. It sounds Masonic.
Well, it's comparable. It's similar to a Masonic relationship.
It's clear that these men make major mistakes concerning revelation from God. But after years of singing songs like Praise to the Man and Follow the Prophet, it's really hard to accept the fact that these men are just as lost as the rest of us. But once you start to accept this idea, it really begins to eat away at their credibility. Why should I listen to them? Why should I spend my life doing what they think? They don't even know me. But more importantly, they've been so wrong in the past. What makes them correct now?
President Nelson, would you ever lead anyone astray?
Oh, no.
That's not what prophets do, is it?
Some of them have said, if the president of the church should ever lead people astray, God would take him away. So I like to stay here, and I won't lead you astray. Do you know what the word prophet means? He speaks for God. And so God won't lead you astray, and the prophet will not lead you astray.
Other priesthood-holding black men faded, each new generation of LDS leaders continued to decide the issue based upon memories of prior precedent and previous statements, sometimes reaching back to Joseph Smith in their minds, and other times to Brigham Young, each succeeding generation becoming increasingly locked into the previous generation's precedent, especially as they grew to believe that it was a pattern established by Joseph Smith himself.
Generations of church leaders have denied life-saving ordinances to people for centuries, all based off a misunderstanding of revelation. These men are not good guides for me to bet my life on. This was the realization that really liberated me the most. There wasn't a roadmap that was dictated that I needed to follow. There was no one that was responsible for my life more than me. Finally, the third and final reason that I lost my faith was my own moral compass. Two aspects of my own moral system were being challenged: my conception of justice and my own integrity. The more I learned about the plan of salvation, the more questions I had. In particular, it seemed that the God of the Bible and the Book of Mormon, by my understanding of justice, was unjust. In fact, by the church's own articles of faith, God is unjust. We believe man is punished for his own sins and not for Adam's transgressions. Although this is a reference to original sin, the basic concept is that it's not just to punish people for the sins of others. When I was still a member of the church, I would often use this exact argument when discussing theology with Catholics. How can you believe it's just that God would punish us for the sins of Adam and Eve? And honestly, it was a good argument.
I have an underlying resentment about being a sinner from the time of birth simply because of the choices of Adam and Eve. I don't get why everyone has to suffer the consequences for this. Well, let me just say this to you. I can understand why you think that, but all sin began in the Garden of Eden because of Adam and Eve's disobedience to God. He warned them. He said, all the trees in the garden, the whole garden is yours except one, and this one I have reserved for myself. He warned them that there would be consequences. He warned them very clearly. When he sinned, his sin was transferred, carried down to every single human being. When you and I come into the world, we come into the world with a bent towards sin. We have an old sinful nature. That's the way life is. You may not quite understand that, and I do understand the fact that you have a question about it, but that is the truth. The whole human race suffers. Not only that, but the earth itself suffers.
The Western conception of justice is that we don't hold people morally responsible for the decisions and actions of others. Imagine if your neighbor committed a crime and society decided to punish you instead. Individuals being responsible for their own actions is something I believe in very strongly. But eventually I began to realize that at the core of the Christian message, it was about a human sacrifice of a perfectly innocent person for the sins of others. Jesus was a perfectly innocent human sacrifice to God to rid us of our own moral responsibility for our actions. How could a perfectly just God do this? And why would he accept the murder of an innocent person as payment for our sins? No matter how I tried to spin this, at the core of the Christian message was a story about a man being killed for the sins of others and not for his own transgressions. The next issue I ran into with my moral compass was a challenge to my integrity. My whole life I've been taught that integrity was critical to being a good man. And now this put me in a dilemma because my core identities were at odds with each other. I was a Mormon, but I was also trying to be a man of integrity. The problem was, I was a Mormon that didn't believe in the Book of Mormon, or in prophets, or even in a God worthy of praise. I've always said that belief is not a choice, and deep down, I didn't believe in Mormonism. To me, claiming to be a Mormon made me a liar. I had to choose between my Mormon identity and my integrity. Although leaving the community I grew up in was not easy, it was the only reasonable choice I had. These three examples show the progression of my faith transition. Each one demonstrates a major failure in my faith, but more importantly, each one demonstrates a major success in my life. In denying the divinity of the Book of Abraham, I was affirming my belief in the importance of truth. In denying the authority of prophets over my life, I was affirming my belief in personal responsibility. In denying my Mormon identity, I was affirming one of my core values, integrity. Faith transitions are not easy, and often they're not even wanted. They involve tearing down a major part of who you are, but they also present an opportunity to affirm your true beliefs and to follow your own moral compass. That's all I've got. I'm Forrest, Latter-day Skeptic. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.